inaugural year, Dr. Shankar Sen, formerly Vice Chancellor, Jadavpur University, and Minister in charge in the Government of West Bengal, has kindly consented to deliver the Kolkata Port Trust Anniversary Lecture 2004 on an important and topical theme, Healthy Oceans. Kolkata Port proposes to publish the series of lectures in an anthology, which would be an important reference material for researchers and scholars. We would also have the privilege of listening to the presentation by Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, formerly Professor, Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, and Director, Indian Institute of Port Management, who has kindly agreed to present the keynote address on the theme, Story of a River Port. May I now request Mrs. Rebecca Das kindly to present the bouquet to Dr. Shankar Sen. May I now request Srimati Purba Mondol to present the bouquet to Professor Satyesh Chakraborty. May I now request Srimati Mitali Ghosh to present the bouquet to our Chairman, Dr. A.K. Chanda. May I now request Srimati Snigdha Haldar to present bouquet to our Deputy Chairman, Haldia Dock Complex, Sri M.L. Meena. Finally, may I now request Srimati Jaya Shet to present bouquet to our Deputy Chairman, Mr. M.A. Bhaskarachar. May I now request our Deputy Chairman HDC, Sri Meena, kindly to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning. We have all assembled here on the occasion of 135th birthday of the port of Kolkata, the oldest port in our country, as also the Diamond Jubilee of Rabindra Setu, commonly known as Howrah Bridge. In this auspicious occasion, eminent personalities will recount and deliver commentaries on the port's march through a span of 134 years and its future. It's my great honor to welcome Professor Dr. Shankar Sen, formerly Vice Chancellor, Jadavpur University, and Minister in charge, Power Science, Technology and Unconventional Energy, Government of West Bengal, who has kindly consented to deliver the Calcutta Port Trust Anniversary Lecture 2004 on healthy occasion. I also welcome Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, formerly Professor, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and former Director, IIPM, who would be delivering the keynote address on the story of a river port. I welcome our Chairman, Dr. Chanda, Calcutta Port Trust, my colleague, Mr. Bhaskaracharya, Deputy Chairman, Calcutta Port, Honorable Trustees, and other dignitaries who are present. I welcome the leading industrialists, corporate captains, members of the press, and senior officials of this region for being present in this occasion. Thank you.
May I now have the privilege to invite Dr. A.K. Chanda kindly to address the audience.
Dr. Shankar Sen, formerly Vice Chancellor, Jadavpur University, and Minister in charge of Power Department, Science and Technology, Non-Conventional Energy Resources. Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, formerly Professor, Indian Institute of Management and Director, Indian Institute of Port Management, Sri Meena, Sri Bhaskarachar, dignitaries on the floor, diplomats, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. On this momentous occasion of 134 years of Calcutta Port's service to the nation and Diamond Jubilee celebration of Rabindra Setu, Howrah Bridge, I extend a very hearty welcome to all of you. 134 years perhaps is a speck of dust in the stream of time. But from the standpoint of an institution, it is an event to write home about. Kolkata Port Trust, with its dedicated service to the nation over the years, has been the precursor of a megapolis, the city of Kolkata, and has carved out a niche for itself in the maritime world of trade and commerce. It has many distinguished achievements to its credit, but over the years, it has, while being a premier port at one time, it has also seen ups and downs like the tidal river in which the port is located. It has had hiccups at times, but on the whole, it has rendered a distinguished service to the nation, and it still continues to render a very valuable service and has a place for itself in the maritime sector. It is a matter of pride that Kolkata Port Trust still continues to handle a very sizable share of the total cargo handled by this country. In fact, its share has been going up, and it's a matter of pride that Kolkata Port Trust during the last 2 years registered the highest growth in absolute terms in the entire country for 2 consecutive years. Kolkata Port Trust, which is very often identified as a port with low draft, incidentally has also the deepest draft of the country, and just by harnessing it in a limited measure, it handled MV Arctic Blue with deadweight 4,84,276 tons, the largest vessel ever to visit any Indian port. It also recently handled MV Atlantic, carrying the highest parcel load of the country, 3,82,000 tons. That is the history and the story of Kolkata Port over the last 34 years. Kolkata ports, over the years, the performance by any yardstick of measurement would be considered excellent. And we are doing better, and the best is yet to be. For we are still to harness our potential at locations where we are the strongest. We are yet to harness the qualities which are unique. We are still to fully explore and harness our potential at locations like Sagar and Sandheads, where the draft is amongst the highest in the country and in the world. And Kolkata Port, riverine port that it is, and being connected with 2 national waterways, NW1 and NW2, has immense potential for inland water transport. And in our journey ahead, certainly these will be the potentials that we'd like to see materialize. In the competitive world today, there are only 2 groups of agents, winners and losers. And one who is contemporary in his thought, contemporary in his action, perhaps somewhat ahead of time, can only survive and be the winner. And it is with this object that we have organized this Kolkata Port Trust Anniversary Lecture 2004. We have initiated, and we have in mind to discuss contemporary issues and the issues that are of frontier science and technology, so that we can remain topical and think ahead of time. And we have in our midst persons like Dr. Shankar Sen, who has illuminated the state in the past, and I'm sure he will show us the way with his vision. And we have with us Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, a scholar, and with his intimate familiarity with the geography of this river, he will steer us ahead. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to stand apart and leave the floor to them. But I shall be failing in my duty if I do not convey my appreciation to all of you who have remained present today in this historic occasion to share with us the morning glory. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now is the keynote address, Story of a River Port. Focus is quite obviously on our enigmatic river Hooghly by Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty. Of course, he is a very, very well-known towering personality by his own right, but yet, just for the sake of refreshing your memory, a small introduction to Dr. Chakraborty. Dr. Chakraborty was educated in Calcutta and London in geography, taught in Presidency College, Kolkata, Burdwan University, and Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. Has also taught in many institutions in the USA, Canada, Japan, and many other countries. Served for 5 years as a full-time member of the West Bengal State Planning Board, and also as the director, Indian Institute of Port Management. Now retired, but still very active. He has been consultant to many countries in matters related to environment management. May I now invite Dr. Chakraborty kindly to deliver his address.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Sen, distinguished people on the dais, and many of my old colleagues in the Calcutta port. I had perhaps shown an unseemly rush to come towards the dais as soon as my name was announced. You know that I have always done it in the past, never refused the Port of Calcutta when asked to help them. The idea of this particular lecture, I thought, could serve as a keynote address, came from you. Because in your invitation letter, you have mentioned a very interesting term, the Hooghly River Ports Complex. And that's, I think, the apt definition of all the facilities that we have created, but over centuries, on the Hooghly Port, Hooghly River, which are all serving or had served in the past their specific roles in improving the economic state of this part of the world as well as India. I will apologize to you first for having failed to submit my written paper as I had promised to your secretary in time. I have sent it, and I have given also a copy of it, so when you want, you can go through it. But today, I shall not be reading out from that paper because it is hatefully boring to read out from a written paper. I shall be organizing my thoughts in terms of what I had tried to convey through this paper in order to highlight some of the major issues. I'm doing it only to keep, I hope, the dialogue a little bit interesting, and than reading a paper, and also to confine myself within the allocated time. You see, when you say the Hooghly River Ports Complex, one has to remember that this has emerged over many centuries and has emerged particularly in the context of overseas trade. We had overseas trade in India for a long time. As a matter of fact, if you talk about globalization, India has a long history of globalization. But you know, from the 18th century or 17th century onwards, or 16th century onwards, something was happening. The arrival of the Europeans, by the time Europe has advanced, economically advanced a great deal, and they wanted to have interaction with India. They had come. They had come one by one. I think the first one was the Portuguese who came here. How did they arrive? Negotiate the narrow creek which connected the estuary of the Saraswati River with the main stream of the Ganga is still a mystery. There are anecdotal stories, of course, but they arrived at a place where they had set up a warehouse, and a corrupt version of Portuguese word warehouse, angali, is still being kept as a name for the particular place named Hooghly. The Portuguese came, but soon, I mean, they came rather at the later part of their adventures in Asia. By that time, they had established their footholds in many places of Eastern Africa, of Southeast Asia, even China. And the capital of their Portuguese possessions in Asia was Goa, which is also a very important port, a member of your community. And so when they came to Calcutta, the maritime shipping of under the Portuguese was decaying, and the navigators found it more profitable to indulge in high sea piracy, and particularly in Bengal, in slave trade. Both made them popular, and they had to be driven out. But the most singular impact, long-lasting impact of this international trade on the emergence of the economy of this region were made by the Dutch people. They came, settled down very near Hooghly in a place called Chinsura, but unlike the Portuguese confining themselves in their Angoli or warehouse area, the Dutch spread out into the countryside to tap the local markets, and started buying from there by setting up their windows, you may call it, single window concept, you may say, buying and paying immediately. And they collected all these materials to Hooghly. Think of it, the kind of organization they created, and that led down to contributed at least towards the development of what we call urban hierarchies, settlements in this part of the world. Now, Portuguese did, the Dutch did something more. They understood the meaning of sustaining navigation. To sustain navigation means to sustain the navigators. To do that, they created a big firm in Baranagar, and from that firm, various kinds of interesting items of consumption, food, used to be produced and given to loaded on the vessels. Otherwise, it was difficult for them, for these Dutch people, to sustain themselves with Indian, maybe moody chile, etc. One good contribution of it is that Calcuttans acquired the habit of eating bacon rather early in the years and ham, all produced from the Dutch farm in Varanagar. I don't know the origin of the name of Baranagar. Maybe that they were having farms of pigs has contributed upon the acquisition of this name. Another important thing that was done, but is excavation of the tidal creek. There was a tidal creek joining, I'm told, the original course of the Bhagirathi River with the estuary, which we now call Hooghly Estuary, but geomorphologically speaking, it was not Hooghly Estuary. It was Saraswati Estuary, and by that they facilitated, uninterrupted entry of vessels from all the way from the ocean up to Chinchora. Prior to that, the Portuguese had to unload their goods on country boats, what we call in Bengali, shalpi, to carry it through that creek, load it again on a vessel, and take it to Hooghly. And that was a cumbrous affair and expensive. Unfortunately, there is no English record of the Dutch achievement in this particular regard, but while I was studying the Rotterdam municipality's records, I found mention of it. I mean, they didn't really elaborately describe when and how this particular creek was cut, but they said that the Dutch had established two institutions, very important institutions. One is the Zoll, that is toll collection point, Tankzoll, and another was toll depositionary points called Bankzoll. And it is said, from their geographical distribution, we can identify that what is known as the Bankshall Court of today was really the Bankzoll. And it was so important that when Calcutta Port Trust came up, they created the first dry dock at Bankshall Ghat. We have forgotten about these things. But when I go to the people over there and talk to them, do you know anything about this, excavated creek? They say, sir, this is a river where if you dip, you don't get the punya from the dip of a holy river. They call it Kata Ganga, Ferengi Ganga. This is the general anecdotal mythical belief of the people of that area. As a geographer, geomorphologist, I can tell you that the sedimentation characteristics of the place south of Shibpur Botanical Gardens and north of Garden Beach are quite different. And therefore it's quite likely that the Dutch achievement was the real achievement. Anyway, Dutch also gradually lost their interest in India trade because they have primarily located themselves in the Indonesian archipelago, having direct control and access to these expensive spices. Now, people may think that European diet, those who visit Europe and eat their food would never believe that they know how to use spice. But the major spice that the British, the English, the Europeans needed was black pepper. Do you know for what purpose? During the winter season, it was hard to find, animals. So these were, hunted before the winter, and those had to be pickled for preservation. And this black pepper, kala mircha, golmorich, was an excellent pickling material. And the whole of winter they used to eat this pickled meat, and you will be getting references of, in the old European cookbooks, the reference to pickled meat being offered. Anyway, Dutch were losing interest, I told you, and on their footsteps came the Englishmen and also the French. I don't have to recount the story of the fight between the French and the English and how the English won. But the English very soon found out that west bank, that is the right bank of the Bhagirathi, will not be a very, very suitable place, although they thought that that is a better place. In Clive's records, it is written, in Chopchanok's report particularly it is written that he considered the right bank of the river more important than the left bank, not because of ground of health or sanitation, but to get easier access to the riches of Hindustan. I mean, don't get surprised when you chose Haldia on the right bank of the river under certain circumstances. But the Chopchanok chose it on the left side, left bank. Why? Everybody says it had a good, big draft, good draft. But what I consider as most important is the bend of the river, which is a very difficult bend for the long modern ocean-going vessels to negotiate, had garden reach. There was, at that particular point, a very tall tamarind tree, Petul Gach, and every visitor to Calcutta of the 16th, 17th century said, "We have sighted the tall tree, we have come to Calcutta." It was a good sign, Even if you go to the records of the Calcutta port navigational records, you will find they're mentioning the names of various kinds of trees even today. But the other advantage was that as the vessels negotiated, they suddenly faced the port of Calcutta endowed with a fort with guns pointing at them. They immediately knew that it is better to be friendly than to, behave in any funny fashion. There is no history of any particular shell ever fired from these guns of Fort William, but it was a great advantage. And the advantage was taken to the full, used to the full by the Englishmen by, dictating the terms of trade in the conditions of what we call them flying over the rivers, and what I should have mentioned earlier, but now is the question to tell you, what the Dutch had created was the pilotage, necessity of having pilots to guide these vessels in this shoal-infested and bar-infested river. The English port of Calcutta maintained these Dutch pilots, but they said that they should be recruiting local hands. And most of the local hands in the initial years were from a community whom we normally describe as Anglo-Indians. And that is also the time when the pilots decided that what is good living. And I had one occasion of the pilot's idea of good living. I was invited to Dredja and breakfast was served, 16 different items. And, then they showed me a piece of paper showing what choice do you have, instead of bed tea, you can have bed coffee and gin if you want. They really lived well. Anyway, so when the English had established themselves in Calcutta, well, they didn't have much of an infrastructure, one or two jetties, not crew-pile jetties. So sometimes when the water was high, the vessel could come and unload on the jetty. But on most occasions, they couldn't do it and had to use a country boat to carry it from the vessel to the jetty. But jetty was a great improvement. And this concept of jetty was first introduced by the Dutch again. You see, I cannot dissociate the Dutch navigational system that developed over the Hooghly from the later navigational system that we are now having, even today. Anyway, you all know I don't have to tell you about the history of the port of Calcutta. You had sponsored a study project, Nilmani Mukherjee, Professor Nilmani Mukherjee's History of Port of Calcutta, which was really the history of the Port Trust of Calcutta. And you've been kind enough to appoint me as an official editor to edit an anthology of, I think, good articles to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the Port of Calcutta. These are all available, and you can go through them. I won't repeat it here. What happened is that the Port of Calcutta, even up to the middle of the 19th century, had nothing to boast of regarding infrastructure. And there was relentless complaint coming from the merchants of Calcutta and merchants of the European countries that loading, unloading of merchandise is really clumsy over here. That was the time the then government of West Bengal again, brought out this idea of a river trust. They didn't begin with the port trust, they said river trust. This is exactly where you have again come back, I find, after more than 150 years afterwards. You are now thinking again as river port trust, a river port complex, right? Ultimately, these commissioners and the port trustees, these are all institutional changes. Well, what is most interesting is that with the coming of the Calcutta Port Trust, lots of new technological innovations were introduced. And the innovations of the time were the screw pile jetties, so that the tidal water could be negotiated by that jetty, which could rise and fall without throwing out the people. Okay. Then wharves, Then the dry dock of Bankshot Ghat, I mentioned. But the demand was for wet dock. So one by one you had gone in for wet docks, Khidirpur 1, Khidirpur 2, then the Garden Reach over there, King George's Dock, which is now called Netaji Subhash Dock. And for a long time you had the gala time. The major problem that was created was during the war. During the war, Southeast Asia Command centered at Colombo, had its advanced center at Calcutta. And Calcutta port had to handle various kinds of war materials, plus food, medicine, soldiers coming in. The choice before the Calcutta port was to go in for further mechanization. But that choice, Calcutta port was not allowed to exercise by the then government of India. They wanted money, every bit of it, to fund the war rather than deploy in new machineries. And Calcutta port acquired one of its banal, shall I say, liability for the later period in the formation of what we call these labor unions. You had to go in for a labor-intensive technology, and after that you have not been able to. You have taken a long time at least to shed off the redundant labor force, as due to compulsions of the economy and navigation, you had no other choice but to go in for more and more capital-intensive, labor-saving technology. This also coincided with your decline of a river. You see, from Hooghly to Chinchura, Baranagar to Calcutta to Khidirpur, this downward shift, don't get worried about it, the seaports are generally fixed in location, but not river ports. Nowhere in the world have the river ports been fixed at a place. Look at the St. Lawrence River. Look at the Mississippi River, the St. Louis, New Orleans port, has got its wharves all over, down, up and down this particular river from Illinois down to the Gulf of Mexico. There is nothing wrong in it, you know. One doesn't have to feel upset. Oh my goodness, we are losing control from Calcutta. The actual hub of activity is going to Haldia. I'm saying this because that was the time when I was very closely associated with you, very young. I could talk to many people, and somehow there was a sense of fear in the minds of the people who were living in your Alipur Park, houses, working in the comforts of 15 Strand Road, thought that the rain is missing. Anyway, something just could not be about it. One, the need for bulk handling. The need for bulk handling is a post-war phenomenon to emerge. So the beautiful sets of cranes that you had in Kidapur dock to handle coal had to be abandoned in favor of coal handling plant in Haldia. You, of course, made a misadventure with iron ore plant, but I can't blame you for that, because somehow in India there is a general belief that there are decision makers, not the general economy. Therefore, you had really put a bet on the decision makers of the Ministry of Shipping and Transport, believing that they will favor you with flow of iron ore through Haldia. It went to Paradip. Don't regret it, it happens. But you have been innovative enough, to convert that particular iron ore plant as early as possible to the best options available into coal handling plant. Petroleum, POL, Bajbaj jetty was set up by you a long time ago, but Bajbaj jetty was not suitable for handling the kind of demand that we have to handle. Bajbaj jetty could handle refined petroleum goods, but we needed crude. And at Haldia, we had set up this petroleum refinery. Therefore, it's a natural thing that a much larger, domain was centered at Haldia in this part. That is another element of bulk handling. I had suggested at that time, I'm talking of 1967-68, why don't you construct a pipeline below the river and bring it down to the eastern side and on the left bank, and you should have lots and lots of facilities. You don't have to pay for the transshipment accepting power to pump it. Anyway, I don't know whether it has happened. Whether a tunnel has been created, sort of pipeline has been created below the riverbed. If it is created, then I think we have shown your wisdom. You see, all these things were going on fine. Like the salt gola getting separated from the left side of the thing, Haldia got separated from the left bank thing, in order to handle much more efficiently or meet the demands of the emerging demand for bulk handling of goods. And that bulk handling of goods has come to stay. Along with that has come another revolutionary thing called containerization. And in containerization, you can containerize everything excepting gas, I suppose, free gas or oil. But if you put them in containers, you can carry the gas and all those things in container also. But there are much more convenient technologies available. And in the area of containerization, please don't mind, I thought there was a failure of nerves in the Calcutta Port Trust. They failed to distinguish between centralized control, according to my judgment. I am a management man, so I should come to that jargons, between centralized control and decentralized decision making. It's two different things, you see. For example, decentralized decision making was taking place with the all bulk handling equipment in Haldia. although you believe that you have a smug belief, I must say, that we are controlling everything by what? Tightening the finance. In the case of containers, what you did, you lost sight of that inevitable reduction of draft of the river. Instead of trying to call in vessels, ocean-going vessels to Calcutta, it would have been much more convenient to go in for shallow draft, long barges. That means converting Haldia as an assembly plant, but having these containers shipped from various ports of or port installations of Hooghly. You still have this option. Why? Because Indian importers and Indian exporters are not comparable to the as mass-scale producers or consumers of goods as you have in, say, United States of America or West Europe. Hardly would a single consignor be able to mobilize goods which will occupy a full container. Therefore, there is a need for storing of goods, merchandise, staffing and de-staffing of containers. You need them. So, I am telling you all this because you are now contemplating of developing Sagar as another port. That is from the angle of draft, the river would be more capable of handling bulk goods than Haldia, because Haldia is also suffering from sedimentation. The Ballari Bar is extending towards south a little, and Haldi river does not bring in enough water to wash it out. So if you are developing Sagar, then what will you be having? All these chains of facilities which started with the Portuguese at Hooghly will go up to the ocean, near the ocean, and you have got to make very judicious, take judicious decisions of how to mobilize the small contributions of each of the old facilities in order to aggregate those together to meet the global demand for mass or bulk handling. Whether you require a railway line and a bridge across Kakadip is a matter dependent upon the type of goods that you shall be getting. But in most instances, you can use a much tried out technology. I remember, I think in the mid-70s, when we started with getting, emergency delivery of food grains, the vessel, a big vessel, had to wait at Sagar, and daughter vessels were deployed to bring those things to the Kidderfoot dock silos. Instead of daughter vessels, how about thinking of daughter barges? I am not a technologist. I have been with you. I know about management. I know about choices to be made. I have given you my suggestions, which may not be technologically one of the most grandiose things. But what you need in India today is managing the innumerable quality brains together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, for a very illuminating speech. And we heard about the colonial rulers who came to our country in search of El Dorado and what happened thereafter. Now, I suppose responding to many of your desires, must be feeling very thirsty. There will be a tea break for 15 minutes.